Hello everyone and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host, CodeMarvelous, and today I'm joined by Timmy Wong.
Hello, everyone.
And he is probably most notable as being the fine netrunner that finished second in last year's World Tournament. And Timmy, for those at home who might not know too much about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into Netrunner and kind of your journey to being the world's second best Netrunner?
Sure. I actually demoed Netrunner, the new Netrunner, when it came out at Gen Con 2012. The game sold out really, really fast. But in the free gaming room, I found someone who had managed to pick up a copy, and I got him to show me how to play it, and it looked really cool. I hadn't really heard anything about the old game, but the cyberpunk theme sounded really neat, and basically it seemed like a really cool game, and I've always been kind of a Fantasy Flight fanboy, so I followed their releases pretty regularly.
Yeah, I mean, Fantasy Flight basically has a direct line into my wallet.
Yeah, if I had more of a wallet, most of it would probably go to FFG.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. They make some good games. Let's say.
Lots of good games.
They make a bunch of MMOs basically, games with like $15 subscriptions a
Right.
month.
That's a great way to put it.
But yeah. So thank you very much for coming on. We're very excited to have you, and especially talking about a really rogue Whizzard deck that I'm a huge fan of. So,
Cool.
for those of you who don't know, because maybe you didn't see it because your sync deck is getting a little bit more traction online, this is the Credit Clicker 3000, which you took the Vegas Regional with, and it's a Whizzard deck, but it isn't that same old Dumblefork Wizard we've been seeing recently.
Not exactly.
So, why don't you talk to me a little bit about the creation of this deck and kind of what led you to build this and try to construct this?
Sure. So right before Northern California Regionals this year, I think it's been a month now. Basically, what pack was Mamet City Hall in?
I want to say, was that Saltset Island?
No, I think it was before that. I think it was Democracy and Dogma.
Yeah, because that was where all of the resible assets that if they don't have ice on them, things happen. That was Democracy and Dogma.
All the political assets.
Yeah.
So that pack had just come out, and us Southern California people were preparing to drive up to NorCal and play in that regional. And before that, we did a barbecue testing day where we all met up at someone's house. And there I got to play some games against John D'Alessandri. He's a really good player from Ventura County who placed top 16 at Worlds 2 years ago, top 16 at Gen Con last year. Anyway, we played some games, and he had this new IG deck that Abram Jop had designed. Right, the Fire Lock deck.
Right, the prison.
Yeah, so that deck had just come out. John had been playing a bunch of IG before then, but it was a more shell gamey Ronin version. And that version I was pretty comfortable dealing with a bunch of different runners. But this new deck, we played 3 or 4 games, and he ground me out in each one. It was pretty demoralizing. It was cool seeing this new deck work, but also the games took forever. I played this one game as Noise, and even though both of us were playing at a pretty fast clip, it took over an hour. And I lost because that's how that deck works.
Yep.
Yeah, so after that experience, I decided that I needed to rethink my runner choices because none of the ones I've been thinking about really had a good shot against this new breed of IG with Mamet City Hall spamming out assets super efficiently and this passive kill condition, so you never have to make a move or do anything.
Yeah. And I think another important note there is that you mentioned that, it's no runners were good against it. The hard part in the current meta, which you've I think done pretty well here, is you've made something that's good against the IG deck without being terrible against everything else.
Right. There's no point in playing a deck that's only good at beating IG because most people won't play it, and you'll never get to like the top tables where people are playing in the IG deck.
Right.
So when I went home, I thought long and hard about like how to beat that deck, and the conclusion I came to, which a lot of other people also came to, was that you need to trash all their stuff, and that's really hard. So you need those Whizzard recurring credits to really have a good shot of doing it. But also they have this IG power that counters your trashing ability, and they can shore up archives really well sometimes if they're playing good ice like Hive, and sometimes they even have Caprice to put on archives.
Right.
So to deal with that, the easiest way is Employee Strike to turn off their ID ability. But then a lot of IG builds play currents of their own, so they can turn off your Employee Strike. And they can shuffle those currents back in with the Museum of History. So, yeah, it's a long rabbit hole, basically. But then I thought, like, how could I recur my current more than IG can recur their current? Well, runners have some pretty good event recursion cards, and same old thing in Deja Vu, so I could play those. But like, why does it make sense for me to play a bunch of event recursion in a Whizzard deck? Well,
If only you could be playing a magical blue card.
There's a really famous event card that's been pretty good for the history of the game. And basically,
and
playing this card over and over has been a good strategy for a long time.
Yeah, and thematically, in the card, you're taking money from Jinteki. Ah, but yeah, so let's jump into it and let's talk about the card choices, because in some ways I find that this deck really is evocative of earlier Anarch archetypes that kind of went away. Like, this looks similar to an Anatomy of Anarchy type build almost.
Yeah, the core strategy isn't anything too new. Anatomy of Anarchy was the first really popular like spam siphon Anarch deck. So it's definitely the same general strategy as that. I just came to the conclusion that it was a good idea along this really circuitous route of making sure I had Employee Strike out all the time.
Yeah, that seems good. So let's just jump into it. Do you want to start with events, hardware, programs? Where do you want to start?
I don't know what makes the most sense. I guess events. They're the most events.
Yeah, so we've got 2 account siphons, which is just great. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Why 2 as opposed to 3?
It's the core of the deck. I would love to have 3. I mean, I would play like probably 10 if I could, but obviously there's this little limitation of 4 influence, and Employee Strike also costs influence, and because of MWL, Parasite also costs influence, so I couldn't really find a way to fit more than 2 in.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but to make up for that, I play 1 Planned Assault, which is a 2 influence criminal card that searches for a run event from your stack. So it's not nearly as good as the 3rd account siphon, but it's only 2 influence, so this helps my consistency at drawing account siphon.
Yeah, and you can always use it for other things if you really want to or really need to.
Definitely. And
so we've got 3 Deja Vus in the deck.
Right, so this is the Anarch event recursion that made Anarch siphon decks a thing. Right, it's one of the only cards that gets an event back from your graveyard or heap. But it can also recur 2 virus cards, which is pretty handy a lot of the time too.
Yeah. So how often is it really, like how the game unfolds dependent, or, are you more often using this to bring back programs, or would you say you're more often using it to recur events?
It really depends on how the game is going. Probably events more often, but there are a lot of times where like once in the game you'll really want like two virus programs and deja vu will be really clutch. Getting back like medium and embarrassing or something like that.
Right. That makes sense. So we've got 2 employee strikes, which we talked about before. For those of you who might not be familiar with it, it's the 1 cost neutral current that just says the corpse text box is blank, which is pretty good. It's worth noting here that it's just strong against basically everyone you're going to see in competitive play.
That's not quite true. I don't really bother playing it against like Netrunner, for example, because they can turn it off so easily. But
That's true,
yeah,
I get. That's true.
but it definitely fits really well into this deck for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
One is that economic IDs are really powerful, engineering the future and Pollen of Foods. And for normal wizard decks, it doesn't really accomplish much to turn off that like drip of money for a little bit. But when you're playing an econ denial strategy like this, every credit really matters. So being able to turn off that drip is really valuable. And also the fact that you're like keeping them from scoring with the threat of siphon means that your currents tend to live for a lot longer too. So employee strike is a lot more impactful against like engineering the future or Apollona in this deck than for a lot of other decks.
Yeah, definitely.
Another reason why it fits so well is that Blue Sun is historically a really bad matchup for these Anarch Siphon decks because they can bounce back in credit so fast.
Okay.
And they have all this like tough ice to deal with. But Employee Strike is really good against Blue Sun.
Right. So right after they oversight AI something big, you're like, nope.
Yeah, their ID is so powerful that they have to like build their deck around using it so much that like if you can just turn it off at will, it's super devastating for them.
Right. That's true too. And it's worth noting, yeah, like just and yeah, I think that was something that is an important point to bring up, that the siphon recursion strategy works when you can keep them from making those off credits. Like that was one of my concerns with trying to play Reyna more recently, is that there's so many ways for the corp to make money back that like her ability is kind of trivial in the current meta, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, unfortunately, Wizard's ability is just so much more well situated right now, right?
Right.
Being able to kill their economic assets does more than Reyna's tax right now.
Right.
And one reason I think this deck is effective is that it kind of fights every access by which the corp tends to try to get money. Like, you can trash their assets really easily because you're Wizard. You can turn off their ID powers with Employee Strike. And also, even if they're running Operation Econ, you can often just siphon them so that they can't afford to play like restructures.
Right. We have a single forked, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I have one of all of the cutlery actually, forked, knifed, and spooned. They're not useful in every game, but when they are useful, they're really good.
Right.
The reason I have one of each is because of that planned assault that I mentioned earlier. Being able to just get the right cutlery for the situation is really useful.
Right. And I imagine in the matchups where you're using them, you tend to be saving them for whatever is being like a real money hog for you to break. Right?
Basically, the way the deck functions, the corp usually has to rely on getting this like one really important ice res that you can't deal with easily. So having the right cutlery to just kill that ice and keep going is really devastating for them.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got 3 I've had worse. We don't really need to belabor that. It's a really good Anarch card.
Good card draw, good damage protection.
Yeah, double use cards. I'm so glad we have them now in Netrunner. We've got Inject. Inject is a really good one, but I think before we talk about Inject, we might want to talk about another card that you included in this deck, and that's Making an Entrance.
Yeah, so that's the new edition from the deck from the newest data pack, Sunset Island. Uh, I didn't have it in the earlier drafts of the deck, but then I was talking to Aaron Andrews, and he showed me a build he had that played the card, and I was like, "Hey, this might be really good." Uh, my deck's like main weakness is that I don't draw a count siphon early sometimes, and this card seems really effective at drawing whatever I need really early.
Yeah. I was very. Uh, People at home, I was having a discussion with Timmy before we started recording about how I took this deck to a tournament, and I was so wary of the inclusion of this card, but man, it came through for me so many times during the tournament.
That's good to hear. What were some of your experiences like?
Um, I'll give you the example of I needed to basically get the Fem into the trash to be able to get through, what was it? I needed to be able to get through a Kamainu that was on HQ, so I could keep the siphon going, and I hadn't found it, so I was able to making an entrance, arrange everything else in an advantageous order, and then bin the Fem so that I could retrieval run it out, and then siphon on my last click to take them back down to 0.
Right. Yeah, it's just a crazy card. It helps you set up your like next 3 turns.
Yeah. And it's just it's crazy, and knowing what's coming up means that you don't waste clicks.
Yeah.
Like drawing for something if it's not there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you basically have perfect information for the next couple of turns, and that's like so powerful.
So going back to inject is very anarch thematic draw where you're pitching your programs for money and you're gaining the other cards. But now, how often were you making an entrance and then injecting? This is actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Like, were you comboing those cards often or not really?
Yeah, pretty often, I'd say. One really cool thing I figured out you could do with making an entrance is you don't have to trash the cards, right? So often there are a bunch of programs on top that you don't really need, but instead of just trashing them with making an entrance, you can put them below the inject, and then you can inject them for free money later.
Yeah. It's good. So we've got Planned Assault, which we already talked about. We have 2 retrieval runs. Now, Retrieval Run is the 3-cost event where you run archives, and if you're successful, instead of accessing, you pull out and install a program out of the bin. I imagine this is primarily for Fem, but can you think of any other notable examples where you've used it for other stuff?
Yeah, like it's most powerful with Femme Fatale, but really you can pull back any program in the deck. I added it in after I realized that the deck just needed more recursion. Like it burns through pretty fast and there's no levy. So just having one more recursion card that you can draw with inject that lets you pull back like a knight or a parasite that you really need to get past a piece of ice. It's just really good and flexible.
Right. And before I forget, in addition to the game that we're going to play, if you guys go on to the deck list on Netrunner DB, you can find videos of him playing the deck, piloting the deck in a tournament. So those are really handy as well. Make sure you check those out. So we've got Sure Gamble for the same reason Sure Gamble's in every runner deck that runs Sure Gamble. Money is great, especially when you're trying to hold people down.
Well, it is notable in this deck because it's actually the only money card.
You mean the only straight money card?
Right, other than account siphon. Yeah.
Other than account siphon. But account siphon's really the best money card because you gain 10 and your opponent loses 5. Like, it feels good.
Yeah, once you start landing the account siphons, you really don't need money cards anymore, and that's the reason I don't have anymore.
So we have 1 Plascrete Carapace because when you're running account siphon, sometimes people try to burn your house down, I hear.
Yeah, I actually run this card way less than most people, I think. It's not in most of my decks. But when you're planning on like keeping all your tanks with the Count Siphon, it's a pretty nice safety net to have.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, it's just good to have. Now, one of the cards that I'm so excited is in here, and I'm so glad you're bringing it back into play, is Vigil. I love Vigil as a console.
It's really good here.
So, what's the ethos behind why you decided to add this card, and take it over other Anarch consoles like Turntable or Grimoire?
Well, you don't need memory in this deck very badly, so Grimoire isn't really necessary. Turntable is always nice for countering certain corp strategies, but I think Vigil is just a lot more powerful with your game plan here. Because you're constantly keeping the corp at low credits, so they can't really afford to play out a lot of their cards productively. They have to spend all their time clicking for credits. They're going to have a full hand a lot. It's the same reason why the old Reina Headlock decks often played Vigil. When you're denying the corp money, Vigil becomes really good at triggering. And when you're drawing a card almost every turn for free, that's really powerful. It really keeps the engine of the deck rolling.
Right. And it's also worth noting that by doing this, you also made it so that your draw engine can't be punished by you floating tags like with Wild Cakes.
Yeah, exactly. Resource draw engines don't fit here because they'll probably get trashed. So here's a non-resource option that happens to fit very well.
Yeah, I've always loved Vigil. I've always thought it was very thematic because as you take away options, you're given more power, right?
Yeah, it feels really bad as the corp, as you're like spending all your turns doing nothing and they're drawing Vigil cards for free.
Yeah, it feels, it feels good. It feels good. So
Yes.
our only resources in this deck are 3 same old things. So I imagine, but you can speak a little bit. I imagine these are never usually sitting on the table.
Rarely, yeah. Usually the same old things are too valuable, so I stock them in hand until I'm ready to play it and then use it in the same turn.
Yeah. And it's just whatever you need at that time, but probably a lot of siphons.
Usually a lot of siphons, but whatever you need, yeah. Employee Strike against decks that are really weak to it. Sometimes you just need an extra like cutlery or retrieval run. It's really flexible. There are 25 events in the deck, so it's going to get something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the other things that I noticed when I was looking at this is that this looks kind of like a max deck almost. Because you're just got like a fat stack of events. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Most people these days play these siphon decks out of, if they're Anarch, they play them out of like Max or Valencia. I just figured that the Whizzard ability was really good right now, and it also works well with the Econ Denial strategy.
I agree. I think it's rare. It's so rare to see a corp that doesn't have at least 6 trashable cards.
Yeah, Wizard's just never been better.
Yeah, if not more. So let's go over to Breaker Suite. As far as Breaker Suite, we have 3 Fausts. So we don't have a Levy in this deck. So tell me a little bit about how you make the choice to use this over something else when you decide what to pitch, because, we've got one pass with this deck.
Yeah, so you have to be a little more judicious with Fast in this particular deck than normal. You can't just expect to levy everything back and have a second go. But like Siphon is just really good with AI breakers because it means you can plop down one breaker and then siphon them through whatever ice they have in HQ. Faust is just the best AI breaker right now. People have asked why I don't play Eater instead, but Eater costs a lot of money, and that means I would have to play a bunch of money cards to also support Eater.
And you wouldn't get accesses.
Yeah, and it has this limitation where you can't access things, so you can't get through the remote, for instance. Faust is just so much more flexible. You can plop it down turn 1 and immediately siphon them through basically anything without any other setup. It hurts sometimes tossing important cards, But as long as you make sure that the runs you're making with it are really worth the cards that you're tossing away, it's not a huge deal. Like if you're landing a really high impact account siphon, it's not a huge deal if you toss away some cards that you might have wanted. You can draw more cards and really take advantage of the tempo that you just get.
Right. And it's also worth noting, if you're account siphoning and maybe other things aren't rezzed, you're not going to end up using Faust like another Whizzard deck would use Faust, because the ice at that other server might not even end up getting rezzed.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have Femme Fatale, which I adore. It's one of my all-time favorite breakers in Netrunner.
Me too.
So it's just great. It's bypass. It helps you deal with big stuff that you don't want to deal with. And I imagine rarely are you actually hard paying for this.
Pretty rarely, but you can afford it if you have to once you've landed an account siphon. Yeah, but normally if the deck has enough draw that you can just get it into your heap and then retrieval it back for 3 credits.
Right.
Yeah, it's super good. It deals with like every problem ice, and it happens to break sentries, which is really important against stuff like Swordsman.
Right. And one of its greatest weaknesses, which is its boost to strength cost, is mitigated if you're just taking all of the corpse money.
Yeah, and also data cycle.
Right. It's just a fantastic card when you can afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Knight is one of the cards in this deck that is the most reminiscent of some of the Anatomy of Anarchy builds for me, or at least of my old Siphon Noise. And like, I'm looking at this card, and you know, I haven't seen it touch a table in a long time.
Knight used to be really good. People played it in Criminal. I think it fell out of favor when Blue Sun became really popular. The Kaisa get turned off really hard by Blue Sun's ability. But now you have Employee Strike, so Blue Sun is no longer a big problem if you can draw that card. Like I said earlier, with Fast, Knight, like any AI breaker, is really powerful with account siphon. So Knight, the 2 Knights are 2 more ways of just breaking whatever HQ ice is stopping you. Right now, it also deals with a lot of problem ice that people are playing to try to deal with fast, like Little Engine and Wraparound, both conveniently at 7 strength. So Knight is your really flexible answer for cards like those. But it also breaks almost any other ice. So it's pretty good here.
Yeah. And
it's a little costly and clunky, but you make do.
Right. And you don't, and there's nothing saying that you have to use it if the situation doesn't come up where you need to.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the other weird side effects of Knight, which is one of the things I miss the most about it, and maybe you can speak to it, is it almost acts like another Parasite, because if people get fed up enough, they'll trash the ice that it's on, which you're completely fine with as a Siphon deck.
Yeah, exactly. As a Siphon deck, they can only res like way fewer ice than we're normally used to. So if you can just deal with each of those ice one by one, you should be doing fine.
Yeah, I love it. It's Knight's just great. So we have a David. Only a 1 of, but David doing pretty good work. Doing pretty good work. Keeping those Blue Suns down if you can't find the Employee Strike.
Yeah.
Now we have 2x Data Sucker, which I'm not really gonna. We don't really need to belabor too much. Data Sucker just does great work in this game.
Sure.
Now you have 3 mediums in this deck, right? A lot of times when we see account siphon and Anarch, we also, like you said, see Eater Keyhole. You know, why the mediums over the Keyhole strategy? You know, why 3 copies of this? Talk to me a little bit about your decision-making process with putting this in the deck.
Well, I think Keyhole is normally played because of the Eater drawback, right? Eater doesn't let you access cards, but Keyhole circumvents that by letting you trash a card without accessing it. I think if it wasn't for the Eater drawback, then very few decks would actually play Keyhole, because medium is just so strong.
Okay.
The other advantage Keyhole has is it's really good against trappy, ambushy decks like Personal Evolution, where you don't actually access the ambushes. But if you're playing Account Siphon, they're not going to have money anyway, so you're not afraid of any traps.
That's fair.
Yeah. In the earliest version of the deck, I was actually playing a Data Leak Reversal package to add like another vector of attack when the corp was poor.
Of being a jerk.
Mm-hmm. It's not a nice strategy, this deck.
No.
But I found that they weren't really pulling their weight. It was like if the corp just got some breathing room, they would just get trashed, and they weren't providing the lasting threat I needed. So I ended up just cutting them, and to make up for it, I went up to 3 mediums to really ensure that I get a pressure card as fast as I can after I've taken out the corpse mine.
Right.
The deck doesn't last for a really long time because there's no levy and you're burning through your cards fairly quickly. So you really want to win before the corp can get their thing set up and outlast you. So 3 medium is my way of doing that.
I think that's fair. And from my brief experience with the deck, it pulls a tremendous amount of weight to have 2 of these down, by like turn 5 or 6, because they're like, well, I need a purge, but I still don't have any money. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And then we got Parasite. Parasite's just so good. I love Parasite.
Yep, Parasite, one of the best cards in the game.
Parasite Data Sucker. It's like peanut butter. It's like peanut butter and chocolate.
Yep. The corp is going to like click for 3 credits and res their like Eli or something on R&D. Well, you'll have a bunch of Data Sucker cannons probably. So Parasite down, keep going.
It's good. I love the core of this deck. I love what it wants to do. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's like a silver sniper rifle round. It's good against what ails you without being bad against the more common things that skilled players are playing.
Yeah. I was happy to find a deck that is fairly well-rounded, but also happens to beat Industrial Genomics really well.
Right. So, Timmy, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
And what we're going to do now is we're going to go on to competitive Jinteki. We're going to find a random opponent, and we're going to see how we do.
I can't wait.
For everybody watching at home, like I said, check out the deck list. There's going to be even more plays of it there. And until we meet you again, always be running.